Welcome back, pet parents. I have the wonderful Miss Amy Renz back with us today on the Pet Parenting Reset. And I initially asked her to come back on because I want to talk about the new restorative diets that Goodness Gracious has available for you, for your dogs right now. I think they are incredible, and I want her to tell you all about them. But I also don't want to waste this opportunity because she is so brilliant and has so much knowledge to share with all of you pet parents and me as well. That's one of the perks of doing what I do is I get to learn right alongside of you. So I think let's just go ahead and jump in. Amy, thank you so much for being back with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jess. This is wonderful. It's always a joy.
Yeah. You know, every time I hear you speak, I know I say this all the time, I'm just always blown away by the information that you share and how much research you put into that information that you share. And before we hit record, you were just talking about a couple of the talks that you've given recently. And one of the things, and I've actually, I didn't tell you this before we started recording, but I was actually creating like my own little worksheet recently on pet food math because there's so much to consider and trying to simplify it for people and learning all the things and trying not to be fooled with the marketing claims. One of the biggest things that I see from people is because carbohydrates are not listed on the guaranteed analysis. Fortunately, hopefully, I don't know. I think we're all kind of up in the air on what's going to happen with pet food regulation at the moment. But they're supposed to be changing the labels to where you have to add the carbohydrate percentage. But even so, something so basic to you or me is like a dry food diet versus a high moisture diet. And looking at the protein and fat percentages, people are like, oh, well, this dry diet has so much more protein in it. No, really, it doesn't, right?
Right.
So I'd love for you to kind of explain some of that to people to help them kind of get past all that marketing and maybe understand a little bit better about, comparing labels of foods because it is apples to oranges a lot of times.
It is. It is. Yeah. I think almost everything that's on a pet food label is really designed to confuse consumers. And it's unfortunately, we have some really good consumer advocates out there. Susan Sixton, is the first person that comes to mind when we talk about truth and pet food labels and all of that. And she's done a remarkable job advocating for consumers. But, it's a huge battle. AFCO, the American Association of Feed Control Officials that regulates pet food, it's the board, the people that sit on those, committees and those panels with AFCO are trade association members of Big Pet, and Big Pet Food sits on those trade associations. So, what becomes regulation and what becomes the narrative around pet food is really what Big Kibble wants us to hear. So there's a lot on a pet food label that we kind of have to cut through in order to get at the nutrients of what we're feeding our dogs and our cats. And, one of the biggest things that I even see on real food packaging that can be confusing to consumers is something that, you see a lot of times on raw food, freeze-dried food, a little bit on gently cooked food. And it's that, claim about 90% meat and bone or 95%, meat and organs, and whether or not that's actually useful information. And so many people think it is. But here's something, right, to think about is that think about it being Taco Tuesday, right? You going into the grocery store aisle and you're going to go buy some ground beef and you walk down the meat aisle and you have a package of 80% lean ground beef and you've got a package of 92% lean ground beef, right? And there's a huge price difference between the two of them. And it's because the 92% lean ground beef has a lot more protein in it than fat. And so there's 3 times more protein in that 92% lean ground beef than there is fat, but the 80% lean ground beef is more fat than protein. So which one of those is in that package of pet food, right? You really can't tell. So that information that's on that label, it's not really helpful. In fact, it can be confusing to most people, right? And so the best way to look at pet food is how human nutritionists look at human food, and that's where the calories come from. What's on that guaranteed analysis, though, is essentially the weight of those macronutrients in the package. Those percentages, and we were just talking about this right before we went live, but you look at a human food label and it talks about the numbers on there are grams and their percentage of daily values, but the guaranteed analysis is just these random percentages. Like, what do those actually mean? And so I like to think about, my puppies are barking, but I like to think about it like as a mud pie, right? And if I were going to go make mud pies and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to put a pound of dirt in here and I'm going to put a pound of worms and a pound of rocks and a pound of water, what's my guaranteed analysis for that? And it's essentially 25, 25, 25%, 25%, right? And so that's how we think about a guaranteed analysis. It's the weight of the components that go in as a percentage of the whole. Carbohydrates, as you mentioned, aren't listed currently on pet food labels. They will be, but not for several years. And so you have to figure out first what that carbohydrate number is. And that's essentially by adding up all of those things that we see on that guaranteed analysis, plus ash, which sometimes is there and sometimes is not. And if it's not there, you use 6% for dry food and 2% for a wet food, right? Those are good rules of thumb. And you add up all that stuff and you subtract it from 100. And that's going to give you your carbohydrate. And then essentially you've got to know from there that there's 4 calories in every gram of protein and every gram of carbohydrate and 9 calories in every gram of fat. And so the math of it, and I'll share with you a link to a worksheet, cheat sheet that we have so you can publish it for your listeners. But it's essentially, you multiply your protein times 4, your carbohydrate times 4, and your fat times 9, and you add all that up, right? And then you take your protein and divide it by your total, and that's going to give you your percentage of protein. And you do the same for the fat and the same for the carbohydrate. And when you get those numbers, you've done it right because all those numbers add up to 100. Because protein plus fat plus net carbohydrate equals 100% of calories. Fiber, ash, moisture, they might be on a pet food label, but there's no calories in those things. So then you say, okay, I've got these numbers, right? So how do I evaluate that? How do I know that that's healthy for my dog? And there's, it's not right for everybody, but it is a well-respected, well-recognized standard, the ancestral diet standard, right? And it basically says that our dog's wild ancestors got 49% of their calories from protein, 44% of it from fat, and 7% from carb. So protein to fat ratio would be about, there's probably about 10% more protein calories than fat. So it'd be like 1.11 to 1, right? And have a quick, I threw it right up there for you. So that's the ancestral diet model, right? We do, and we'll talk about this when we get into our restorative diets. We do more of an what we call an epigenetic diet model, which is a little higher on protein, a little bit lower on fat, about the same on carbs, to address certain needs that we see modern dogs have today, and issues and challenges that they have to deal with that their wild ancestors did not. So that's essentially the math of it all. If you're going to try to there's a couple of quick and dirty hacks you can do. So otherwise you're going to have a pet food label and your calculator and try to make sense of all of that as you're standing in the aisle with the freezer door open, wondering which one do I buy? So there's a couple of quick and dirty hacks, right? One of them is to just try to get a quick sense on whether or not there's more protein than fat in that package. And the best way to do that, the fastest way to do that, is to say, okay, my protein number on my guaranteed analysis, I'm going to multiply by 4. And my fat number, I'm going to multiply that number by 9. And then compare those two numbers. And whichever one is higher, that's the macronutrient that's greater. So that's one way to determine if there's more protein than fat in the package. There's another quick and dirty hack that you could do that says, okay, if I'm going to look at an ancestral diet model, right? 49% protein compared to 44% fat on a caloric basis. What would my guaranteed analysis ratio look like? And essentially it's 5-2. So you would want to look at a guaranteed analysis and say, okay, my protein and my fat are basically in a 5-2 ratio or higher, meaning there's more protein than fat. And, that will give you a decent place to start. And then from there, if you say, okay, I want to compare this food to that food, then that's the best. Then that's when you're doing your full macronutrient calculation to compare the two.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question a little bit? Hard to do without a whiteboard and
Yeah, right. No, I'll actually put that in the show notes, because I think people can kind of maybe copy and paste that into their notes app on their phone, and then when they're out, having something like quick that they can just pull up and be like, okay, is this, how close is this to the 5-2 ratio that Amy was talking about?
Right.
Yeah, because
That's all my graphics I prepared for the day.
Well, it is, sadly, as you were talking about, these big pet food companies sit on the boards of these trade associations who sit in committees to create the rules and regulations that the states adopt for pet food to follow. And so it is very intentional. I was going to use the word insidious, which is probably accurate, but
right. Sometimes it's you got.
Yeah. To, in my opinion, make things as complicated as possible for the average pet parent to not understand. So they flip around the bag back over to the front and look at all the pretty pictures of that beautiful cut of chicken and these gorgeous bright blue blueberries and, all of the things that they actually want you to be paying attention to, even though that doesn't necessarily equate to what's actually in that bag of food for your pet.
Right.
So being able to be that savvy consumer that says, no, let me turn this bag around because that's where the information is that I actually need to know. And hopefully, in however many years when carbohydrates are listed, it will make it that much easier for pet parents to, because I think most people understand that they don't want a ton of carbohydrates in their food or their pet's food. They just don't see it. It's not right there in front of their face. So they're blind to it or don't have the time, the bandwidth to do that kind of research. So if they're actually faced with, oh, this bag of food has 45% carbohydrate in it.
Right. Yeah.
It will be easier for them to say, well, that's not the bag of food I want.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So, currently we have to do the math to figure that out. And I think, I'm not a numbers person. My husband is. I will say he counts everything. He looks at everything as a number. We will walk into a restaurant and he will say there are 32 people in here and the average check is $15 and how is this place staying in, but you know what I mean? Like he just does that. He'll count the ceiling tiles at the doctor's office. Like that's his thing. But I'm not. So I would actually have to pull out my calculator and do the math and say, okay, they're telling me that protein is at 32%, whatever it is they're telling me that protein is at. And figure it out and subtract by 100. And also having to know that ash is often not listed. Like that's a thing as well that people don't always know or understand. So when we are, how do you look at a dry food versus say a gently cooked food? What are some of the things that you're looking at there? Other than the obvious that the gently cooked food is high moisture, so you would want that for your pet anyway. when you're looking at the labels.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily compare just a gently cooked to a dry food. I think, I did this really interesting research project for myself and presented the findings at the last at Feed Wheel Summit that I was at just recently. And I looked at almost 50 really, really high end brands. And so, I don't care how we compete to Purina Pro Plan or whatever that stuff is, whatever those things are, they're not competitors, right, of
Mhm.
ours. And they're not even just competitors. They're ultra processed foods, right? So, but when we look at the bucket or of real foods, right? So the ones that are healthy for our companion animals, those would be the ones that you might find on Susan Thixton's list, right? Or Dr. Judy Morgan has a list of pet foods. So, these are companies that they vetted, and these are really great brands. And if somebody's going to feed a commercially prepared food and not do it yourself at home, that's the awesome place to start, right? Find a brand on one of those two lists. So I looked at brands like those, right? So about 50 in all. And I looked at every chicken, turkey, beef, and pork recipe that was complete and balanced for adult or all life stages and not a prescription diet. And I did the macronutrient caloric calculation on it. So there were 243 of those recipes.
Wow.
And yeah, and of them, only 26 met or exceeded the 49% kcal standard for protein. And so, not all dogs, the ancestral diet is not the diet for all dogs, right? Dogs are individuals, but it's a really good place to start, right? When you're talking about, okay, what is a healthy diet? And that was really surprising to me, right? Because my assumption is that all these brands have at least, an offering in that ancestral range, right? Where it was, a little more than 10% of us did. So I was really pleased when I saw how our diets fared on that comparison, right? All of our complete and balanced foods were above 49% on a protein basis, right? Caloric protein basis. So I think that that's a really great place to a really great way to evaluate food and which one you want to feed, right? Is to start looking at not just comparing gently cooked to an ultra processed diet, but it's to look at the whole macronutrient picture of all of them. In terms of dry food diets, right? Replacing as little as 20% of a dry food diet with real whole foods, whether or not it's a raw diet or a gently cooked diet, is going to have a positive impact on health, right? We know that from several studies. The Dog Risk Group out of Helsinki, right, did a number of studies. They looked at a mom's early puppy's diet, pre and early postnatal diet, and then later postnatal diets, and found that all of them, when they were not processed diets or had more real whole foods in them, it had a lower incidence on developing atopy in adulthood, right? So there's epigenetics at work for you right there, right? Mom's diet has an impact on what that, that little body's gonna problems or health that they might have. So, but water is super important to get back to your question about dry food diets compared to fresh diets. Water is the biggest carrier for nutrients in our body. And when dogs have where they're constantly eating dry food, they are at risk for chronic low-level dehydration. The food that you and I eat, it's 75% water. If they're eating a dry food diet, it's 10 to 12% water. And so those dry food diets can cause a whole bunch of problems. Number one, there's problems with digestion because dogs need a lot of gastric juice to digest protein. Protein digestion is predominantly done in the stomach. And so when you don't have enough water or enough hydration in your body, you're not producing enough gastric juice. It lowers pepsin action, and we don't get a good digestion of proteins. And that can cause allergies. It can cause, a GERD. It can cause indigestion, all kinds of tooth decay because there's dehydration happening there, which sets us up for metabolic disease. So getting as much real whole foods in the diet is really great just for hydration purposes. And then, there's a whole bunch of more things that we could talk about in terms of lack of synthetics in a lot of real foods that, that we're going to see, or more bioavailability of nutrients, more phytonutrients that we're going to get. Our gut, those microbes in our gut, they digest fiber and bioactive compounds, I3C, sulforaphane, camphor, quercetin, ergothioneine found in plants and mushrooms. And then those bioactive metabolites are then transported throughout our bodies to help us with many metabolic and immune-mediated processes and detox processes, and essentially to epigenetically eliminate cancer as a life-threatening disease. So, studies have shown that cruciferous vegetables like kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli sprouts contain chemical components that can prevent the dysregulation and overexpression of genes that are responsible for the uncontrolled cellular proliferation and viability of various types of cancer cells, and that those epigenetic benefits can be inherited by future generations. We want to know why 1 in 2 dogs over 10 get cancer, right? A powerful reason is that of the 8.65 million tons of ingredients that go into commercial pet food, green leafy vegetables make up 0.05%. So, it's really important to get those things in the diet too. It's not just about protein and fat, right? It's about getting phytonutrients. When I look at our recipe by weight, right, what goes into it, and we are very high protein. We're one of the highest protein products on the market. High protein, moderate fat, low carb. We're still using about 25 to 30% plant and mushroom components in our diet. And that's because these things are loaded with fiber and water, which have no calories. So by weight, they make up a lot, but calorically, they don't. And I tend to like to break that down by, that 25 to 30% into maybe 15 to 20% dark leafy and cruciferous greens, maybe 3 to 6% orange root vegetables, because they can also be sources of starch, 2 to 4% fruits, because they can also be sources of sugars, and 1 to 2% seeds and nuts, because they can also be sources of fats. I would put mushrooms in that orange root vegetable category too, because they can also be a little bit, have a little bit starch component to them.
Gotcha. There were a couple of things you said in there. One, I'm feeding my dog snacks because she was whining at me. What's interesting, and I'm just not smart enough to use the word epigenetics, but
Yes,
I
you
was
are.
talking I was talking to BC Hinchin earlier this year, because just the reality is, I think, even though the media helped downplay it, we have had a huge there's an awareness that came early on this year about problems still undetermined, but with some ultra processed pet foods making a lot of pets sick, like even more so than kind of what we consider normal, that kind of go under the radar. And so I was talking to him about that, and one of the things we were it was early on in this whole like awareness of the problem, and we were talking about the idea that, okay, your mom, your grandma, whoever is telling you that you've always had dogs and you've always fed them, let's say Purina or whatever it is, you've always fed them this kibble diet and they've always been fine and they've lived a long time and whatever, so they're going to be fine now. But the reality, as somebody just like me observing all of this is that from generation to generation to generation, from eating this ultra processed food their entire life, generation after generation after generation, like these dogs just now that we have now maybe just aren't able to handle these things, these high carbohydrate loads, all the toxins that are we know are in, whether it's the herbicides and the pesticides and the AGEs, all of the things, their bodies aren't as well equipped because it's been so many generations now that they have been nutritionally abused is comes to mind. And so I think that that's probably kind of in line with what you're talking about. We can change that trajectory by starting to feed better foods to our dogs so that the next generation is a little bit better off. And then the generation after that is a little bit better off than the one prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely, Jess. Right on. I think one of the biggest challenges our dogs face today that their wild ancestors did not is being deconditioned, not having enough muscle to fat in our body. Fat is like it's the biggest metabolic organ that we have in our bodies, right? And muscle is medicine, and it's connected to everything. It's connected to our brain health. And so, when we're deconditioned, there are more pro-inflammatory substances floating around in our bodies that fuel oxidative stress, insulin resistance, inflammation, leaky gut, all these problems. And so, our dogs they're deconditioned because of the diets that their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents ate, right? Not necessarily because of what we're feeding them today or because we don't get them out for enough walks or all that kind of stuff. They're just epigenetically set up to be deconditioned. And, epigenetic transgenerational inheritance, right, of the propensity to be fat and sick, right? Those are big, long words, but they basically mean whatever our grandparents and great-grandparents, and that matters. And, the epigenetic transgenerational inheritance of the propensity to be fat and sick is a real thing, right? And it's fueled by those ultra-processed diets, lack of exercise, stress, and a rising level of toxins in our food, our water supply, and our environment. And, again, when we talk about 60% of our dogs or cats being, even more for our cats are over 60%. It's that, right?
Yeah.
And so it has to be counteracted by the diets our dogs eat today. It just does.
Well, and I think it's also why, one of the things I find myself doing so often with clients that I work one-on-one with is almost like a therapist, like, please don't beat yourself up. Like you thought, they come to me and they're like, I thought I was doing, I've even had, because I'm a mentor in Dr. Ruth's program. And so I have students that have gone through the program underneath of me and graduated and come back to me asking me to help them with their pets. And I'm like, this stuff, why are you coming to me? But they feel so defeated because they feel like they've done everything right and still something has happened to their pet. And I'm like, you have done everything right and it is the most you can do. And okay, maybe we can make a few tweaks here or there, but you have to realize that we have no idea what happened to this dog or this cat before you adopted them. We have no idea what happened to their parents or their parents before them. And so we just have to kind of be a little gentler with ourselves, even if we think we're doing all the right things, that nature is still things are still going to happen. And so that kind of does lead me into the fact that things do happen. And when they do, sometimes, it's so funny, I was actually just recording with Dr. Chris Besant right before jumping on with you. So I was talking about this exact same thing where sometimes, even though I very strongly feel like for so many animals, if they are eating an ultra-processed diet, a lot of the times we can transition them to a fresh food diet, and we're going to see a lot of improvement just by doing that. But even so, there are instances where we need more support. Sometimes we need nutritional adjustments. And so I know you have worked for quite some time with some really amazing people, Dr. Ruth Roberts, Angela Ardolino, Rita Hogan, to put these restorative diets together. It's okay. Everybody listening is a pet parent. So. So I would love for you to tell me a little bit about the new restorative diets that Goodness Gracious has available.
Yeah, I'd love to. I I want to segue into that for just, kind of wrapping up one of the things that you're talking about as
Yeah.
you're talking, and what came to mind is my audience. I don't know if you can see her back there, but
Aw.
um, that's wolves. So I read this really interesting study. Wolves can live 20 plus years, and the larger they are, the longer they live. Our dogs, huge study done, 13 million dogs, right? Study done by Mars, found that average lifespan or average age of time of death is 10.6 years. So our dogs live 10.6 years, and the larger they are, the shorter their lifespan, right? Why? Wolves live intact through natural selection, right? Survival of the fittest. Our dogs exist through artificial selection. We breed a curated population of them because we want them, and then we desex or destroy most of the rest, right? So what's the result of this natural versus artificial selection for the last 13,000 to 130,000 years, right? I mean, that's about how long, a little bit up in the air. It's a 10, order of magnitude difference, but we've been domesticating dogs for a long, long time. So what's the result of that artificial selection for at least the last 13,000 years? Some studies have found that wolves have antioxidant generating superpowers.
Mm.
Our dogs do not. Our dogs actually instead accumulate lipid damage. So over time, excessive storage of fat in our tissues causes things like inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are those little power plants inside our cells. So they create energy, but like any factory, they pollute, and a lot of free radicals come from mitochondria. Um, but it causes this in our brain and our peripheral nervous system, which is in charge of voluntary and involuntary functions like mobility and urination and digestion. So when we start to see those problems happening in our dogs, this can be a reason. We also, fat storage in tissues like the liver, pancreas, heart, bone marrow can cause insulin resistance. And those things set us up for a, a cascade of problems, cluster of biochemical and physiological abnormalities that put us at risk for metabolic disease, or put our dogs at risk for metabolic disease. So when we developed our restorative diets, part of that is in our mind, right? It's that we've got a difference between our dogs and their wild ancestors. And so this ancestral model, we may need to tweak a little bit, right? And, it's the model we applied to our classic diets too. It wasn't just something we kind of developed as we were looking at our restorative diets, but we wanted to do something in line in that model, and also incorporate some really, really cool ingredients that put them together in a way that serves nutritional purpose, not just overall general health. So if I can talk for just a little bit more about that model, we're utilizing higher protein levels because most of our dogs are spayed or neutered. And testosterone and estrogen are powerful promoters of muscle mass, strength, and function. Testosterone can increase protein synthesis, decrease protein or cortisol-related protein breakdown. Estrogen plays a role in muscle formation, contractile properties, exercise endurance, all of that. And muscle is super important. It's not just for mobility, but anytime our muscles do work, they release myokines, which are little protein signaling molecules, and they're picked up by the brain. And they help with learning and memory and healthy emotional behaviors, and something really cool called BDNF. BDNF, it stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it supports the survival, growth, and health of our brain cells. So, muscle is really important, not just for metabolic health and mobility, but our brain and our dog's brains too. So we wanted to make sure that our protein levels were elevated beyond the ancestral model. We wanted to look at fat, right? Because fat, if we've got, dogs that have issues with accumulation of fat in their diet, and we know that prolonged not only prolonged high carbohydrate diets cause insulin resistance, but so do prolonged high saturated fat diets, in particular the palmitic and stearic acids that we find in muscle meats. So choosing high protein but lean muscle meats was really important for us in these diets. And then also an abundance of beautiful mushrooms and dark leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables, because when we look at the whole picture of what our dogs eat, a high protein, moderate fat, low carb diet, plants and fungi play a necessary role, right? They're the source of the antioxidants that protect the fats in our foods and the fats in our bodies from damage. Vitamin E and carotenoids do this really well. Carotenoids are found in dark leafy and cruciferous greens, as well as orange root vegetables. They're also alkalizing to the body. So protein is acidifying, so they counteract the acidifying effects of a high protein diet. And some of our ingredient choices, like in our kidney diet, can actually lower uremic toxins. So uremic toxins are the natural byproduct of protein and fat digestion. And healthy bodies can process those things just fine. But when we have a body that's struggling with kidney disease, that can become a problem. So so that's kind of the overall, and plus we need those things to avoid synthetics because, that's just religion for us, But so we developed a diet called Rejuve for gut health and total body health. We developed a diet called Jing for kidney health. That's the only one that's not complete and balanced because it's intentionally low in phosphorus, but it meets all the other requirements. It's actually got 45% of the calories in that come from protein. So it's just under the ancestral model, but it's still by far the highest protein kidney diet that you'll find out there, and it's got more protein than most raw foods and most foods on the market anyway. So which is great for early to mid-stage kidney disease. And in some cases, I was just listening to Barbara Royal talk at the Feed Real Summit about kidney disease. And even in late stage kidney disease, she never restricts protein. So just tuck that in the back of your mind there. And then we have Jive for brain health and Reveal for metabolic health. So we're utilizing in most of these recipes medicinal mushrooms, so like shiitake and oyster mushroom in Rejuve, maitake mushroom in Reveal, lion's mane and reishi mushroom in our brain health one, because each of these mushrooms is known to excel in those particular areas, right? Reishi and lion's mane mushroom, for example, they're adaptogenic, and they can protect and regenerate nerve fibers. They can improve sleep and cognition, reduce stress and anxiety. And stress and anxiety is bad for everything in the body, right? It's bad for muscle health, bad for brain health, bad for our gut. We're utilizing Rita Hogan was amazing. She helped us with our herbal additions. Angela helped us with our mushroom additions, Angela Ardolino. So we're very honored to work with the both of them. So in our gut recipe, we're utilizing calendula and plantain leaf. Calendula, we often think of it for skin wounds, but it's healing to the gut in the same way it is to the skin. It can also stimulate digestive secretions and lymphatics. Plantain leaf supports the production of a substance called glycocalyx, which is a sticky substance that helps commensal bacteria adhere to the gut wall. It also boosts the replication of healthy gut lining cells and that protective mucus layer in the gut. We're utilizing bilberries and plums in that one because they're like supercharged blueberries, but the fiber in plums is really great for a healthy gut. Spinach is in that one too, because spinach is a crazy good anti-cancer and longevity booster. It's gut food, brain food, metabolic food. It's high in those carotenoids, which protect the oxidation of fats in our bodies. And in that one, where our main protein is pork, because it's energetically neutral and lean. We're using pork liver too. It's also loaded with B vitamins, zinc, and selenium that together support joints, immune function, thyroid function, and tons of enzymatic functions in the body. It's also high in B3, and some really, really cool kind of brainy scientific studies have shown that B3 supports the mitochondria the communication inside our cells between our mitochondria and our mitochondrial DNA and our nucleic DNA. And that communication, when it's like really active, is a hallmark of like really young bodies. And so scientists have been able to reverse aging in mice by boosting this intracellular communication. And vitamin B3 plays a role in that, which is really fascinating. So,
Wow.
yeah, yep. We're just using nettles in a couple of our recipes. Nettles are great for adrenal function, kidneys, and nerves. They help balance cortisol, histamines in our bodies, as well as serotonin. So those are really, really great. Our kidney diet, we're using marshmallow root and blackberry leaf because they can, and ginger root because they can strengthen and tone kidney function, right? And prevent UTIs and do a whole bunch of really good stuff for kidney health. So they're really, really fascinating recipes. I love our sprouts. I can't even stop talking about them. So we're using, we partnered with a local woman-owned farm that grows organic broccoli sprouts and mung bean sprouts. And so we're using those in some of our recipes, which I'm really, really excited about.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, I can go on and on, but you probably have to cut me off. So
No, it's okay. I love that, and I love that you're passionate about them. Because they look absolutely amazing. And you mentioned the kidney diet a couple of times, and you kind of made a point to talk a little bit about Dr. Barbara Royal and not doing low protein for kidney, and that is I think that's pretty controversial. I happen to be kind of in agreement with that, and it's been one of those things. I actually was just instructing one of my students the other day because for her homework, she was like, well, I'm going to make the kidney diet for my dog. And I'm like, please do not. Like I do not want that lower protein in your dog. And I think there's so much to weigh there, which I think there is. That's why there's so much controversy, because on one hand, we do want lower phosphorus because, the kidney just can't function. It is not functioning the way it's supposed to be. It can't handle the same amount of filtration of toxins, of phosphorus, of even, breaking down proteins and all of that. But on the other hand, our dogs and cats are carnivores, and I know there's also controversy on that. Omnivorous, carnivores for dogs, whatever. They're carnivores. They're all carnivores. They need meat. They need the essential amino acids from meat to thrive, to survive. And when we decrease the protein in their diet, their body has to get those amino acids from somewhere. So they're literally going to cannibalize their own muscle in their body. So it really is this like balance of, if you have a dog or a cat that is just diagnosed with kidney disease, and maybe it's a stage 1, maybe even a stage 2 that, your vet is telling you, I personally cannot see decreasing the protein for this animal. Like, yes, we need to work on kidney health, but decreasing protein isn't the way to do. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you learned with creating this diet?
I'm more than happy to. So I 100% agree with you. I think perhaps veterinarians, when they give guidance, right, about kidney health, it gets oversimplified. And so because phosphorus is found very in high levels in most meats and organs, right, that a low phosphorus diet gets translated into or interpreted as low protein. But low protein diets are bad. Like, they're bad for kidney health for so many reasons, because of the ones you named, also because uremic toxins are already causing a breakdown of muscle in the body. And generally kidney disease, it's not like kidney disease happens in a vacuum in the body. Kidney disease happens because there's a whole bunch of other things playing a role in there. Thyroid generally gets thrown in there, pancreatic issues, diabetes gets, thrown into all of that complex disease process generally. And those things are going to cause accumulation of fat and muscle tissue, which breaks down fat and makes us, weak and stiff and sore. And that leads to more deconditioning, right? That we started talking about at the outset, right? The problem that our dogs, or the way our dogs differ from their wild ancestors, is that they're more, more prone to deconditioning. So, but protein is really, really important for kidney dogs, because the nature of that disease is to cause muscle wasting. And the fastest way to get sicker is to not move, right? And so you need muscle to move. You need muscle to feel better. Exercise is going to release endorphins in your body, naturally making you feel better. It's going to increase the health and size of the hippocampus, making your brain better, and all of that. And your brain health is tied into your kidney health. So when we talk about protein, and in particular animal proteins, so animal proteins are high in branched chain amino acids like isoleucine and leucine. And these things, generally speaking, in fed states, muscle protein synthesis exceeds muscle protein breakdown, right? And the reverse is true in fasted states. But animal protein causes, at least studies show that it is linked or causes a higher and more sustained synthesis of protein in our body, which we need, which is how muscle is made, right? And so making sure that we get enough meat in our diet helps with that protein. So there's a whole cascade of problems, right, when we have kidney health and our kidney issues. So, generally speaking, it's, we have the microscopic little filters in our kidneys, right? And their job is to, obviously to filter. And so when we have problems, or generally we'll have circulatory microcirculation problems that cause not enough nutrients reaching those kidneys and reaching those microscopic filters. And that's what causes that problem. So when we have later stages in the disease, we're not able to control acid-base balance in our body really well. We can't control or regulate electrolytes and water very well. So we might have had hypertension, but now we've got a worsening of hypertension. And that creates a cyclical process of further damaging those blood vessels. We have eventually become anemic in later stages of the disease, because erythropoietin is the hormone that's released by the kidneys that tells our bone marrow to make red blood cells. And our kidneys are involved in glucose because it manufactures glucose from amino acids at a rate that's pretty much rivals the liver. And so that organ is really important for that function. So, I think I'm rambling on, but maintaining, but protein is really important. Making sure we're getting enough dark leafy cruciferous greens in our diet is really important, because they're alkalizing, and our kidneys, if they're not functioning properly, our body's going to become acidic. So, we want to make sure we have that. Fresh food diets are super important, right? Because the kidneys need water to be able to do their job really, really well. And dry food diets are just they've got to be as equally bad as low protein diets for kidney disease. Yeah. So.
I agree. I tell people all the time, like, hydration is a hill I'm going to die on. Over and above anything else, hydration is the hill I will die on. But so you have been able, with the restorative diet for the one that's called Jing for kidney health, so you have been able to do the low phosphorus while, as you said, keeping the protein.
Exactly, right. So what we're using in that one is, so our protein sources are egg whites. So egg whites are really, really high in protein, but really low in phosphorus. So we're getting a lot of protein from that. We're also using the whole egg because we need choline levels. And it's really important for us to get natural choline because synthetic choline is very damaging to the kidneys. And, believe it or not, prescription or therapeutic diets or kidney friendly diets have synthetic choline in them. So I would encourage people to try to find another alternative than that diet. So we're utilizing whole eggs to get the choline in them, but not enough so that, our phosphorus levels are really high. And then we're also using pork kidney because pork kidney is energetically neutral. It's nutrient dense and rich protein source, inspired at low phosphorus and inspired by the principle of like heals like. So those are our predominant protein sources that we're using in that recipe.
I love that. And I know you do have another call to get to soon. So yeah, I think this was so incredibly informative. And this is going to help people both with understanding pet food labels a little bit more, which, the reality is that not everybody out there is able to feed 100% fresh food diets all the time. So providing information to people to be able to make the best decisions possible with the information they have available to them is so important to me. I tell people all the time, like, I get asked the question, what if I'm just in that financial situation where I can only afford kibble,
Right.
and I'm like, okay, let's do like the some of the cheapest kibble and put as much of that budget into fresh foods on top of it. Like, let's,
Right.
Because the reality is ultra processed food is ultra processed food, and we can argue semantics about the quality of ingredients in different ultra processed foods, but it's still ultra processed.
Right. I think that that's good advice, right? I mean, as much of that ultra processed food as you can replace with whole foods, if it means that, okay, instead of buying a high end kibble, I'm going to buy a low end kibble, right? I mean, obviously there are really bad ones, but
Yeah, for sure.
but I getcha, right? Then take that money and apply it to a whole food diet and mix it in as much as I can. Bravo. I mean, I think that that's a really great approach.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
but
our diets, they're designed to be, all of them are designed to be either the whole food or a mix in or a topper. I mean, that was really important for us too. Is we've got herbs and medicinal mushrooms in there at therapeutic levels, but they are things that you can have every day, and for the long term, because kidney disease really is it's not something you cure. It's just something that you slow the progression of.
Oh, yes, for sure. I think it's like one of the only organ that doesn't really regenerate, right? Like, yeah. Yeah, so I love everything you're doing, and goodness gracious, I'm super excited about the new restorative diets for dogs. And you do have cat recipes in your regular,
Yeah, we
um,
do. We do.
which I love. Especially if people can get their cats transitioned earlier on in life. I mean, it's still possible later on in life, but much, much harder. So I never want to leave the kitties out of it because they are super, super important to me. And I think possibly, oftentimes, like they get less veterinary care than dogs do. I think more often than not, they're fed more poorly than dogs, because they are so finicky. They are imprint feeder.
Yeah.
It's just harder to transition them. So the earlier the better. But I love that you also have some cat recipes for people. And where can people find you? Where can they buy the food? How can they follow you on social? Because oh my gosh, the information you have is so incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Goodness Gracious Pet, and our website, Goodness Gracious Co. You can find us there. You can order online, and then, or depending upon where you live, you can find it in your local store. So if anybody wants to email our customer service, if they don't see it in their local store, email us, and we'll try to point you in the right direction. We're not nationwide yet. We're working on it, right? But one place at a time, one step at a time. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate you and everything that you do to make pets' lives better. I can't wait to see you speak in person again one day. And
Yeah,
guys, oh,
I was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say I'm gonna be at the Nautical Dog event in July. So that'll be fine. And then there's a couple of other things that are potentially coming up, but we'll talk about those when they're
Yeah,
official.
I I do love going to the Nautical Dog event. I get to kind of do a dual. That's where I'm from, Hampton Roads. So
Oh,
I go, like I go to the event and then I go like see my family. So it's like a kill. Well, I generally I'll go to North Carolina, see my grandparents, then I'll go to the event, and then I'll go up to Suffolk and see my family. And so I get to, kill a whole bunch of birds with one stone. But thank you again, Amy. I so
Thank you,
appreciate
Jessica.
you. And for everybody listening, please check the show notes for hopefully some simplified math that you can just copy and paste into your notes app,
Absolutely.
and the links to For Goodness Gracious and all of that wonderful information. I do hope you check it out and try it out for your pets. And yeah, until next time, Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Take care. Bye bye.